Welcome to my second installment of American Presidents. Today we will cover Presidents John Quincy Adams, Andrew Jackson, Martin Van Buren, William Henry Harrison, John Tyler, James K. Polk, Zachary Taylor, Millard Fillmore, Franklin Pierce, and James Buchanan. First, take a moment to think back to my first video. Who wrote the Monroe Doctrine? Yes, it was John Quincy Adams. Good job for all of you that got that answer. So, John Quincy Adams was the son of John Adams. He won the election despite losing both the popular and electoral votes. The election of 1824 had to be decided by the House of Representatives. After being president, John Quincy Adams ran for the House of Representatives and won. He is the only president to have done this after his term of presidency had ended. He served 17 years in the House of Representatives. John Quincy Adams died on the floor of the House of Representatives due to a stroke. The Erie Canal was built during his presidential term, and thanks to John Quincy Adams as Monroe's Secretary of State, the USA acquired Florida from Spain. He was a great diplomat and orator, but he was not known for his small talk ability. Adams had a pet alligator he kept at the White House. It lived in a tub in the East Room. Rumor has it that he enjoyed watching guests flee in terror from his alligator. Or at least that's how the story goes. Andrew Jackson was 13 during the Revolutionary War, and he became a prisoner of the British. After 2 weeks incarcerated, he and his brother were released. Unfortunately, his brother died due to an illness he contracted while a prisoner. In 1835, Jackson was the first president to become a target of assassination. The man tried to shoot Jackson twice, but both times misfired. Jackson was so mad, he hit the man with his cane until he was subdued. He regularly engaged in duels to uphold his honor, and once killed a man who spoke ill of his wife, Rachel. Jackson himself was injured during this duel and was not charged with murder, even though dueling was illegal. It also did not have any negative impact on his political career. President Jackson is most well known for the atrocious Indian Removal Act that authorized the president to negotiate with native tribes for their removal to lands west of the Mississippi. This also led to the Trail of Tears, where thousands of natives lost their lives when they were forced from their tribal lands. This after years of white settlers illegally squatting on native lands who committed violent crimes against the native people. This is a topic I will cover in more detail in a future video.
Like a bird on a tree, I'm just sitting here. I got time.
Martin Van Buren spoke Dutch, and English was his second language. However, he was the first president to be born an American citizen and not a British subject. He was a shrewd politician, but was unable to get re-elected due to the financial crisis when the stock market crashed. He was also a great admirer of Jackson's and continued with the Indian removals that Jackson had put in place. He refused to allow Texas to become a state after it won its independence from Mexico. Texas was its own country from 1836 to 1845. Martin Van Buren negotiated peace with Great Britain, settling disputes over the border between Maine and Canada, which was still a British colony and would be till 1867. After losing the election of 1840, Van Buren attempted to return to the White House 2 more times. He came close in 1844, but lost to James K. Polk, and in 1848 he ran under a new party, the Free Soil Party. Van Buren lived longer than the next 4 presidents after him. He died in 1864 from a heart attack. William Henry Harrison was our 9th president after defeating Martin Van Buren in 1840. He served the shortest term in American history after dying only 32 days into his presidency. He died at the White House from pneumonia after giving almost a 2-hour inauguration speech. Before his short term as president, Harrison was known for winning the Battle of Tippecanoe and was considered a war hero. This helped him win his election like Andrew Jackson before him. He was also a general in the War of 1812 and had a major victory at the Battle of the Toms. He also served in the House of Representatives, in the Senate, and as a U.S. ambassador to Colombia under John Quincy Adams. John Tyler took over after Harrison's death and went from being his vice president to the president of the United States. This was the first time in American history a vice president had taken over due to the death of a president in office. He was rejected by both Democratic and Whig parties and served as an independent. Because of how he became president, his nickname by his adversaries was His Excellency. Tyler managed to alienate both political parties at the time. Due to Tyler's unpopularity, it was uncertain as to whether he would become president at all. In fact, the cabinet Tyler inherited from Harrison all resigned. Tyler's wife, Letitia, died in 1842 at the White House, becoming the first president's wife to die in the White House. Tyler went on to marry a woman named Julie in 1844, becoming the first president to marry while in office. James K. Polk became our 11th president in 1845. He also served as Speaker of the House between 1835 and 1839, and then became Governor of Tennessee. After the Indian Removal Act, Polk raced to purchase now vacant lands. He purchased a plantation in Mississippi and was a slave owner. He continued to participate in the slave trade as president. Although he originally tried to become vice president, he was nominated as president in 1844 at the National Convention and went on to defeat Henry Clay to become president in 1845. Polk followed in Van Buren's footprints and negotiated with Great Britain the 49th parallel boundary. Polk's term in office was primarily taken up with the Mexican-American War, which stemmed from the annexation of Texas in 1845. It is during Polk's term that the U.S. bought California and the New Mexico Territory from Mexico. After the conflict, the U.S. gained not only California and New Mexico, but also Utah, Nevada, and Arizona. Polk died 4 months after leaving office from cholera outbreak in Nashville. Zachary Taylor became the 12th president in 1849. He had been a lifelong military man, serving in the War of 1812, Black Hawk War, the Second Seminole War, and the Mexican-American War. Taylor himself was a slave owner, but wanted to admit California as a free state to the Union. He wanted to hold the country together through legislation. However, Taylor died suddenly after an illness, only a year and a half into his presidency, in July in 1850. He died after eating a massive bowl of cherries after attending a 4th of July celebration at the Washington Monument, which was still under construction at the time. Taylor himself was a slave owner, but wanted to admit California as a free state to the Union. He wanted to hold the country together through legislation. However, Taylor died suddenly after an illness, only a year and a half into his presidency, in July 1850. He died after eating a massive bowl of cherries after attending a 4th of July celebration at the Washington Monument, which was still under construction at the time. He was exhumed in 1991 after questions arose as to if he had been murdered by poison. All tests concluded that his death was natural. Taylor's Vice President Millard Fillmore became the 13th President of the United States after Harrison's death. Fillmore is most remembered for the Compromise of 1850, which settled the slavery issues in new territories. It allowed New Mexico and Utah to decide the slavery question for themselves. It admitted California as a free state and banned the slave trade, but not slavery, in Washington, D.C., and allowed the use of federal officers to capture runaway slaves. One of the most devastating acts in the Compromise of 1850 was the Fugitive Slave Act, which stated that any slave who escaped from a slave state to a free state could and would be returned to their owner upon capture. It was his enforcement of the Fugitive Slave Act that enraged Northern abolitionists, and he was not nominated for a second term. In 1855, Fillmore attempted to win back the presidency but lost badly and carried only one state, Maryland, and 22% of the popular vote. He also strongly disagreed with Abraham Lincoln's policies, although he did support the Union cause. He did not agree with the emancipation of slaves. He is probably one of the most overlooked American presidents, and even the White House's official website calls him uninspiring. Franklin Pierce became our 14th president in 1853. He was a lawyer who graduated from Bowdoin College in 1824. At the time of his election, he was the youngest man to have won the office. He was 47. As a steadfast supporter of Andrew Jackson, he was nicknamed Young Hickory. 2 months before he became president, his wife, himself, and his son were in a train accident. Unfortunately, their son was killed. This is considered the reason that Pierce struggled with alcoholism and depression. His wife rarely left the White House during his term. Pierce signed the Kansas-Nebraska Act in 1854, which led to Bleeding Kansas. The act organized Kansas and Nebraska into territories. It also repealed the ban on slavery in Kansas that the Missouri Compromise of 1820 had established, and allowed both territories to decide for themselves if they would be free or slave. However, this led to violence between the Free Staters and the pro-slavery faction. Pierce at first resisted sending in federal troops to end the violence, and it would eventually cost him the Democratic presidential nomination in 1856. Our last president for today is James Buchanan. I know this has been a long video. Just hang with me for a few more minutes. I appreciate it. James Buchanan was an unusual president for a few reasons. First, he was the only president from Pennsylvania, and he remained a lifelong bachelor. He was Polk's Secretary of State and Franklin Pierce's Minister to Great Britain. James Buchanan supported the Compromise of 1850 and the concept of popular sovereignty. He appointed a cabinet composed of both Northerners and Southerners and hoped to keep the peace between the two. 2 days after being sworn in, the Supreme Court handed down its Dred Scott decision, which stated the federal government had no power to regulate slavery in the territories and denied African Americans the rights of U.S. citizens. This led to more divisiveness. Buchanan had promised in his inaugural address that he would not seek re-election, and he kept that promise. Before the 7 states, South Carolina, Mississippi, Florida, Alabama, Georgia, Louisiana, and Texas seceded from the Union, forming the Confederate States of America. Buchanan did not think he had the constitutional right to keep the states from seceding. Buchanan did support Lincoln's policies and the Union during the war. He died in 1868 at the age of 77. Thank you for watching this video. We got through 10 presidents, and I hope you learned something new about at least one of them. I know I did. Next week will be another video covering Abraham Lincoln, Andrew Johnson, Ulysses S. Grant, Rutherford B. Hayes, James Garfield, and Chester A. Arthur. Please click like and subscribe, and as always, keep on learning.